Hello and welcome to the Newsroom with Saleem. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the recent developments, starting off with what is happening at the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Of course, a ceasefire is in place for 48 hours starting from 6 p.m. yesterday, and this is very, very integral to what the future will hold between these two countries, as Pakistan, of course, calls for its territory not to be used against Pakistan. And that is important, particularly in the context of a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, but also in the larger sense. And of course, moving forward, what really will be the dynamics in order to curtail that and the measures that the countries will be taking in. It is also important to note the role that countries like China, the US, Russia, Iran, or others can play in this regard that have welcomed the ceasefire and have also offered for peace talks. At the same time, we'll also be touching upon what is going on at home in terms of what Pakistan has refused of any acceptance of extremist ideologies, and that is important also in the context of TLP and what is happening in Punjab. Our next story is going to be focusing on the US-India dynamics, something that has seen a certain shift both within the country and of course between both of these countries as well, with the US president also speaking about how there is this going to be a discussion what India does in terms of taking oil from Russia. It is a statement he has given that it will not do so. However, whether that is true is something that remains to be seen, because New Delhi has not responded to that, but there have been a lot of criticisms that have been hurled against the BJP and the Prime Minister Modi as to his relationship with the US and where he is taking India, especially also in terms of hosting the Afghan Taliban regime. And lastly, we're going to be taking a look at the developing situation in French politics with about the fifth or sixth, depending on how you want to count, Prime Minister changed in about 2 years. And this is important also in terms of the problems regarding the budget and debt deficit that the country has been facing, and whether or not the fact that two motions have been survived by the Prime Minister Lecornu is enough for him to survive and for the cabinet to hold and for Macron's problems to end. These are going to be the top stories that we'll be talking about in the newsroom today. For our first story, with reference to what is happening between Pakistan and Afghanistan and how exactly will both these countries be able to curtail it, we're going to be speaking to our experts as to how exactly do they think the ceasefire will hold, given the Afghan Taliban's history with regards to their willingness or capacity in order to ensure and provide the safety to countries like Pakistan, that Afghanistan's soil is not going to be used against any other territory. But unfortunately, we have seen that safe havens continue to be provided to terrorist organizations, and now more so, as the defense minister has also pointed out in a recent interview, it is India's proxy war that the Afghanistan government seems to be fighting in, and there is a lot that is of course at play in terms of the Indian involvement and the way that this is moving forward. How exactly will these elements be dealt with, not just from within Pakistan but also internationally, and in terms of the ways in which different countries are going to be able to help on ground, remains to be seen. There have been, of course, offers made for mediation and peace, and while the ceasefire is welcome, it is something to consider as to what the next steps will be. While this time is important to have the dialogue and to move forward in a positive trajectory, as has always been Pakistan's stance since it stands for peace, but it is something that has been made very clear by the defense minister that if there is going to be a violation or if there is going to be attack, then Pakistan has the right to respond to it and will do so. And that is extremely important to the current situation as well. And we're going to be taking a look at how we're going to move forward with that. And for that, we've been joined by former Ambassador Dr. Jamil Khan. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil, for being part of the newsroom today. I'd like your take on what really is going on between Pakistan and Afghanistan. There is a lot of statements coming in from multiple countries, but how are they going to be involved in terms of the stakes? Because Pakistan, of course, have suffered on this front and has the right to respond. We have less than 48 hours now to the ceasefire. Do you think that this will hold? And do you think that we can achieve something with the Afghan Taliban regime that have previously not been able to guarantee any securities for us?
First thing first, in fact, the ceasefire, it seems to be very fragile because of now one additional factor. Previously, there were other factors, and we've been indicating it. We've been telling all the time to the Taliban administration that their soil is being used, and that's a violation of their own Doha agreement endorsed by the Security Council in September 2021. But that's one part. The second part is why it's becoming a little difficult and challenging, I would say, that this time along, they have now honed their uh, uh, or aligned themselves with the Indians. And then I only fear that previously the Indians had their proxy in shape of TTP and some other terrorist groups, but now Afghan Taliban themselves are now going to play or started playing in the hands of the Indian intelligence. And I won't say that all the Afghan Taliban in administration, they are involved in it, basically a group of it, because we have also heard that there was another group within Taliban administration. They were trying to really again patch up all these differences, what has taken place. In fact, Pakistan waited from 2021 until now. Pakistan had waited, and we have lost more than 3,000 lives. And lately, the strikes are lately the terrorist act from the TTP or from Afghanistan side. It increased so much that we had the shahadat and martyrdom of our army officers almost every day. So that was obviously not tolerable, because what Pakistan did, which it is within the international legal framework, we did not want to. In fact, I would say Pakistan must have done it with a very heavy heart. But at the same time, Pakistan was left with no other option but to retaliate, because otherwise it would have further taken its momentum, and it would have gone even higher and
Right,
higher.
but Ambassador Jamil, that is important, of course. But in terms of where we stand, especially in the ways that we have these countries, including China and the US, talking about offering peace and mediation, how is it that these countries are going to then respond to what the current situation is? Because Pakistan has been dealing with this for quite some time now. But what will it mean for these countries to actually step in when they talk about peace and mediation? What are the tangible steps that can be taken?
Well, Saudi Arabia, China, and all these countries, Doha, the Qatar, they have an influence on Taliban, and they are our well-wisher as well, and they are our great friends. Basically, all these countries who are now trying to really convince Afghan Taliban to really have a saner look at it, what they are doing now. So, from that standpoint, there is a ray of hope. But to what extent do they play into the hands of Indian intelligence agencies and Indian government? We have seen what happened while the acting foreign minister, the interim foreign minister, while he was there in India for about 7 days. So all those statements and the visits which he had been conducting, and that too, in the midst of the attacks from the Afghanistan side. So if we bear that in our mind, and that it would become a little more challenging, but these countries, they do definitely have their influence. The Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China,
Right, but
and it's a
Ambassador Jamil, if they have, I want to ask then, if they have their influence, why is it that nothing has been possible so far? It's not the first time that Pakistan is calling out the kind of safe havens that are provided, the kind of proxy elements that exist, and the way India is also part of this nexus. So how come, if the influence is there, there hasn't been anything that has happened so far?
Well, in diplomacy, it's always consistency and continuity, as a matter of fact. Pakistan has been flagging this point from time to time to the world, and more importantly to Taliban administration itself. But they did not pay any heed to it. And now Pakistan had really escalated. And the escalation has gone that history has never witnessed since the inception of Pakistan, that such a large scale action was to be taken even from Afghanistan. What they did, they had never done it this way, of attacking after midnight, and full-fledged mobilization from Afghanistan side. So far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan has really shown its strength. while we were entangled, while we had a war with India in the recent past, that's in the month of May, first week. So Pakistan doesn't need to really prove itself. Pakistan has already attained its trajectory, both in the military might as well as in its foreign policy. It's the first time that for Pakistan, and then I will correlate it with Afghan Taliban and its our influence, how we can bring multilateral influence on Afghan Taliban. Basically, first time you see in the known history that Pakistan has attained a very high trajectory of foreign policy where we have our relations with all the three big powers, that is China, Russia, and also the United States. So with that trajectory, and of course our trajectory and our profile has really gone so many notches above what it was. So
Yeah.
if we have that our mind, that means that that India now that we all know that has really been isolated, whereas India was trying to isolate Pakistan. So now with this trajectory, Pakistan, and with this profile, what Pakistan now has, Pakistan is in a better position to bring multilateral influence and pressure on Afghanistan. And it's in that context I was saying that yes, these in past if it did not work much because in fact Doha agreement was the roadmap which the Afghan Taliban was to follow, and what is happening in Pakistan today is basically it's a negation of Doha agreement, and Doha agreement was endorsed by the Security Council. That means it has now become international law, and since it's an international law, and if it's being
Yeah.
violated, Pakistan has two grounds to really retaliate. One, that's international law is violated. Two, that is a violation of the Charter of the United Nations, the very first article, and
Right, but
Article 2, its subclause.
Ambassador Jamil, I also want your perspective then that of course there are international laws that are in violation and there are steps that can be taken with regards to those laws. But in terms of what really guides the practical steps that countries take, how do you think that these laws will be put in place in such a situation where you have the Afghan Taliban regime that is not really recognized internationally except by Russia, and in the ways that different countries are interacting with them? How is it then that these laws or violations of these laws will hold any value for what Pakistan wants to put forward?
Afghan Taliban, their economy is thriving on the war economy still, and there are 14 embassies opened, or they have not been. Afghanistan has not been recognized except Russia, but the the scale of ambassador scale or the ambassador level diplomats have been posted there. So those 14 countries are also helping them out in their budget and in their finances and in their humanitarian assistance. And besides that, United Nations still is involved in all kind of humanitarian assistance. Even United States, about 37 million per month they are spending, according to the figure reported on their humanitarian and other assistance. So all these assistance, if it's withdrawn, India, even if they have directed maximum budget towards Afghanistan for its soil to be used by TTP and anyone who can operate against Pakistan, so they have an advantage of utilizing those funds. So from that point of view, I would say that yes, these 14 countries who already have their missions, their embassies there, they have their influence. And plus, more importantly, the Doha assert its influence quite a lot. Saudi Arabia asserts its. China has billions of dollars investment there, and Afghan Taliban, they know that if China pulls back, their economy would be devastated. But more importantly, the Taliban had made a commitment that it would be all-inclusive government. And now it's just unipolar government of only one clan. Afghanistan has about 44 million, a little more than that population. Pashtuns are only 38.5. Tajiks have 24.5%, Uzbeks have 9%, Turkmen have about 12%, they don't have any representation. And this is what the international community and the Doha Agreement implies, that they should have the all-inclusive government. They are not having it. Now is the time, I guess, that they will have from within those cracks, and they will start facing more difficulties if they do not really align themselves with what they have committed. And Pakistan has all the rights. Our defense minister has already told, and Prime Minister today in his cabinet meeting has very categorically mentioned that now the ball is in the court of Afghanistan. And if they do not really respect this ceasefire, and if they don't really want to continue with that, Pakistan has already shown its resolve, because Pakistan thought enough is enough. And we cannot really take so many casualties of our armed forces and civilians, because the armed forces have really taken an oath to ensure the sovereignty and territorial integrity, plus the lives and property of the citizens of Pakistan has to be
Right.
protected. So that has not been made
Absolutely.
very clear.
Ambassador Jamil, I also want to take a look inwards as well, because Pakistan has put forward, as you were speaking about the defense minister as well, and of course other government officials have also spoken with regards to no tolerance for extremism and terrorism. And that's really, really important in terms of what goes on beyond the borders and within the borders as well. And you know what has been happening in Punjab in particular with regards to the TLP. We have seen that the Punjab government has also approached the centre for banning the party based on the extremist ideologies on the grounds and the ways that they have acted. Considering what we know and considering the ways in which Pakistan has made its resolve very, very clear, what do you think needs to be done within our borders as well to curtail these elements, so that we don't have to extend this this narrative forward that Pakistan, when it's looking inwards, is also not doing anything?
No, obviously, Pakistan, in many respects, was in past last about 30 years or even more. They had some different kind of a policy, including foreign policy, which was not really in commensurate with what was the requirement here. But now that they have aligned their foreign policy, Pakistan, and now they have started reaping the fruits of it. So what could be done in this regard, that all this extremism and all what Pakistan has been tolerating for the last 30, 40 years, at least there has to be one has to put an end to it. Because we were, after gaining such a good profile in the world, unnecessarily we were still continuing to have these bottlenecks and these the bad patches because of our domestic issues. So I think it's a resolve. Two things Pakistan has done quite well. One is that now they are showing this resolve, a resolve to really control this extremist elements and that exploiters, I would say. So many exploiters and so many groups they've been exploiting.
Yeah.
If I start giving the examples, there could be so many examples I can cite right now. But then our tolerance, it's basically our tolerance. Where do we stand in our National Action Plan 20 points plan? And one of the points there is to really address the problem of hate speech, problem of the extremism, problem
Right.
of the literature, all that we could not control it. And since we did not control
Absolutely.
it,
And there is absolutely zero tolerance for this, as has been made very, very clear as part of the National Action Plan and the resolve that the state has already put forward. But thank you very much, Dr. Jamil Khan, for joining us and being a part of the newsroom today. This was an important discussion with regards to what is happening between Pakistan and Afghanistan. There is a lot that is going on the front, and this narrative is supposed to be understood worldwide as well, that Pakistan is a country that has unfortunately paid a huge price for the terrorist elements still emanating from within Afghanistan and now being used by India as well in the Afghan Taliban regime, fighting this as a proxy war, as was also said by our defense minister. It needs to be very, very clear that Pakistan believes in zero tolerance for terrorism nationalism, both within Pakistan or anywhere else in the world as well, and has been putting forward its own fight within Pakistan and beyond in terms of the National Action Plan and in terms of the calls for action that it continues to put towards the Afghan Taliban regime and other countries who also stand for peace. And that is integral to how we're going to move ahead. We're now also going to take a look at other regional players, particularly the way that we have seen the dynamics between the United States and India. And this is important to note in terms of not just the way that India is using its own spoiler elements against Pakistan, but also in the ways that there has been a shift between the BJP government and the Trump administration. The important aspect, of course, is the way that that's going to be taken forward, not just politically, but also economically as well. And we're going to be understanding how exactly that's going to impact the way it's going to be put forward and the way it's going to be the dynamic that is important, not just for India, but also the international community. We're going to discuss this further, but we'll take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to the Newsroom. It's Sana. We're now going to be taking a look at the US-India dynamics, especially with regards to the kind of tariffs that we've seen earlier and the statement that has also been made recently by the US President, Mr. Trump, with regards to a commitment that he says New Delhi has made of not importing oil from Russia. There is no confirmation of that coming in from within India, but there is a lot of backlash the BJP government and the Prime Minister is facing because of that. To talk more about this, we've been joined by Farrukh, a senior economist. Thank you, Mr. Farrukh, for joining us and being a part of today's discussion. We're going to be taking a look in deeper ways in how exactly do you think that this dynamic is being affected. I want your version of what you think is the current scenario in terms of how you take the statements coming in from the Trump administration, whether or not India is actually not going to import oil from Russia, and that is in any way in its own favor, since the statement coming in from India says that its citizens are its priority.
I believe that India has placed itself in an extremely precarious position, both diplomatically and geopolitically. It is being pressured by America, and America being India's largest trading partner. And then there is India's economic interests. And since 2022, India imports around 1.8 million barrels of oil a day. A majority of that comes from Russia. Russia has been allowing India discounts of up to $8 to $10 per barrel. And the estimate is that between 2022 and the present time, India has saved or made some $40 to $45 billion in its oil imports from Russia alone. So it's being pressured by America diplomatically, geopolitically, but its economic interests lie in continuing to import Russian oil, which is much, much cheaper than the world markets. In my opinion, the tool that the Trump administration is using is the tool of tariffs. And eventually, India will have to decide, make an economic decision as opposed to an emotional one. And the economic decision would have to be either to let go of the $35 to $40 billion that was saved over the past 3 years and listen to the U.S. Or continue.
Right, Mr. Saleem, there's also the concern, you mentioned economic or emotional decisions, but there are also political ones, because there seems to be a lot of pressure that the BJP government is facing internally as well in the dynamics that it is experiencing with the US. So if it does actually opt for importing oil from Russia, don't you think it will face a lot of pressure from both within and the United States?
Yes, see, there's two things to it. The first one, as you mentioned, is there's a lot of pressure from large business groups from within India that expect that their businesses will suffer if Indian government does not listen to the United States. The other part is that Pakistan, in the meanwhile, is soaring higher than at any point in its 78-year history. both diplomatically and geopolitically. America is all praise for Pakistan. It's almost a love fest, a diplomatic love fest situation there. Our relationship with China is stronger than ever. Our relationship with Russia is good. We have had a defense pact with Saudi Arabia. Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates are all praised for Pakistan. And Pakistan has never seen or sat in such a high pedestal or diplomatic pedestal than ever in its history. Two things are happening to India. First, is Pakistan's diplomatic and geopolitical achievements and India's struggle both against the U.S. Externally and its own business groups internally.
Right. Mr. Saleem, there's concern within the politics of the BJP government and the opposition parties, particularly Congress, as to what the future will hold. There are, of course, the Bihar elections that are also up and coming. But this is something that is important to understand in the larger dynamics of the foreign and economic relations that India is currently witnessing. Do you think that the ways in which we've seen the Trump administration make certain rhetorics, there is a lot of concern of whether or not it is being looked at as some sort of disguised way of giving an ultimatum or a deadline to the BJP government, or making sure that they in fact do not import the oil from Russia and ensure that that's how it goes forward. And this is something that the BJP government is facing. Do you see a possible change of government there, and whether or not that is going to end the economic woes for India?
Well, to begin with, the economic calculation is such that I think Trump's tool of tariff that the Trump administration is using is not going to be enough for India to give up Russian oil. So in my opinion, India will continue to import Russian oil, because India is importing cheap Russian oil, not just for its own consumption, but it's refining it and selling it to other countries at large profit as well. So the economic justification of refusing to import Russian oil, I think it will not take place.
Right, but there can be, Mr. Saleem, there can be increased economic penalties as well. We've already seen a 50% tariff that includes a penalty as well. Don't you think that's a possibility that it can be increased further?
That's what I said, that the tool of tariff will not be powerful enough to persuade India to give up cheap oil. The incentive of importing cheap oil is, as I calculated, about $35 to $40 billion over the past 2 to 3 years. And the tariff, even if there are additional penalties, additional tariffs imposed, the benefit cannot reach the benefit that India is currently deriving from importing cheap oil. So the economic incentive is not there, and I don't think that Trump's tool of tariff is powerful enough to persuade India to give up cheap Russian oil.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Farrukh Saleem, for joining us and being a part of the newsroom. It's important in terms of how these dynamics will unfold and in the ways that we're going to be taking a look at the US-India politics, but it is not just political, it is also economics that are involved, and whether or not that will be a priority for India. As Mr. Saleem was mentioning, there may be enough pressure, but this is something that India can survive. But perhaps the stoppage of import from Russia is something that they won't. Remains to be seen what they in fact do decide to do. We'll take a short break and come back with more news. Welcome back to the newsroom with Sana. We're now going to take a look at what is happening in France, and there seems to be a lot of chaos surrounding French politics in the past couple of years, particularly for Macron's presidency. It's important, of course, to note that in his last resort, he has reappointed the Prime Minister that just resigned after 27 days in office and after just 14 hours of announcing his cabinet. But it seems that he is there to last another day. He has survived 2 motions against him. And this is important to note that there were, of course, very tight margins for that to happen. But does that answer or solve the problems that the presidency and the cabinet are still facing, particularly the budget and the deficits that they're dealing with for quite some time now, whether or not they'll be able to balance the right and left wing political elements, and how exactly will they move ahead without elections or without a resignation that many have been calling for the French president to go ahead with. So it's important in the ways that we're going to be taking a look at how the discussion forward and how we're going to be moving from the current scenario to a future for French politics that will hold. We're now going to be taking a look at what has happened, particularly today, and in the ways that we're going to understand French politics. And for that, we have been joined by Maximilien Nagy, who's a journalist based in Paris. Thank you very much, Maximilien, and I hope that I haven't butchered your name, but thanks for being part of the newsroom today. We're going to be, of course, taking a deeper dive into what really is going on in France at the moment, and we understand it's not the most stable environment, but I want your take in terms of what really is happening at the moment there.
Well, quite simply, the French government at the moment is a French government which is basically relying on the left to govern, mainly on the left, and the right-wing parties, and I'm excluding here the far-right party of Marine Le Pen National Rally. So the right-wing parties and the centre parties have agreed to join the government, where the left is basically imposing its own laws, its own bills for the famous budget, which has to be voted very soon in the following weeks. If the government wants to avoid a reusing the budgets of this year, of this current year, in the year to come. So here we have a very unusual situation, really. It's been unusual for a whole year, but still, where the left is a small minority of parliament compared to the centre and the right, and where it has managed to impose its own propositions for the next budget, especially the suspension of the pensions reform, which, well, it has to be said, is absolutely necessary for France's financial stability. And the fact the left has obtained a suspension of this reform raises many questions about is this budget really fundable, first, and second, and I would end on that point, will all the parties follow, because the left is too small for the moment to be able to pass this budget on its own.
But Mr. Nagy, do you think that despite whatever happens with this budget, do you think that the problems that have been as part of the presidency of Macron, particularly since he called the snap elections back in 2024 that resulted in a hung parliament, will be over? Will there still not be calls for him to resign or call for elections?
To resign until he leaves, for the simple reason that his party is a small party now in parliament, and that he's only supported by a few dozen MPs up to 60 or 70, which is a very small, undoubtedly. And the only wish of the majority of parliamentarians today is to see Macron leave, which would definitely, which would anyway trigger new elections. Now, the problem France is facing, and has been facing since Macron's re-election in 2022, is that there is no party able to gather enough votes to create a majority in parliament. So who would be, if Macron resigned early, let's say, if that happened, which is very unlikely, I think, who would be the next president? Who would be the party able to reunite enough votes in parliament to have a stable government? And that's a question which remains unanswered until now.
Right. There were also questions previously as well when earlier Lecornu resigned, but it was then reappointed by Macron and brought again Do you think that the ways in which we have seen the past 2-3 years and the changes in the prime ministership of France, about 5 or 6 names that were shifted, is adding to the current governance issues as well? And where does that put the public sentiment and confidence into the government?
Well, that's an excellent question. Quite simply, there is a feeling among the French population that parties are doing their own business, and that Macron is doing his own business too. It's a feeling, anyway, a strong feeling which is growing at the moment, especially as governments fall, new ones are created, and I think that's a crucial point in a democracy, like the French one or any democracy in the West of Europe, which is that some parties, for the sake of remaining in government, have been ready to make compromises on some fundamental bills, and one of them particularly is once again the pension reform, on which the right-wing parties who were the greatest supporters of these bills only a few years ago, they've now accepted to be part of a government which is ready to ditch these laws just for the sake of remaining as a government. So there's lots of incoherence going on with several parties trying to remain in power, and really the political spectrum is getting very difficult to understand, because in the end, it's the only important thing for the parties in the current government, which are right wing and left wing and centre, is in the end to stay in power, to stay in government, and the feeling that there's a sort of political oligarchy keeping the power in its own hands is really very strong, yes.
Right. And I know you mentioned this earlier also, Nagy, but I want your take, particularly what you think might happen or what the possibilities exist if not the President Macron and his cabinet and his prime minister or his party, then which party do you think has the potential of coming up?
Well, that's a very good question, which myself, as an observer of French politics, find difficult to answer. The National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, is still very popular, despite Marine Le Pen's uneligibility at the moment, since she was condemned a few months ago. Her party remains very popular. She remains popular, and her, let's say, number 2, Jordan Bardella, is very popular too, especially among young people, but also older ones. So if there were new party elections, which could happen, we never know, the National Rally is likely maybe not to gain a majority, but to increase even further the number of seats it already has. And at the moment, just a reminder for your listeners and viewers, the National Rally is the first party in Parliament in terms of seats, and it could increase its number of seats very soon. But the thing is, we don't really have many polls going on at the moment, so it's difficult to know precisely. But there is definitely a possibility for the National Rally to increase its number of seats. I would find difficult to predict a majority, but we may not be very far, and that could definitely create a crisis in the country, because the left, especially the far left, would never leave this happen. And we're definitely not in safe waters, and things are not going to get better, whatever the outcome, at least for now.
Thank you, Maximilien, for joining us and sharing your views. What happens in France is something very chaotic at the moment, but it seems that the cabinet and the prime minister survive another day to hold the government in place. So what happens next remains to be seen, but it seems that there is a serious crisis on the table, especially with the budget and the way that the public sentiment is rising. There don't seem to be many contenders, as we were speaking to Mr. Nagy, but what remains at the moment is Macron and his presidency, and a very, very important budget that they need to be able to settle. We'll be here to talk more about it as the situation evolves. But that's all that we have from the newsroom today. We'll now see you tomorrow.